If you are new to the world of speculative evolution, you might first get your feet wet by imagining different creatures, aliens, or other what-if scenarios of evolution. Then, when you mature a bit, you get into designing ecosystems, worlds, or more complex interactions, maybe entire evolutionary lineages. Then, at the furthest and most rarefied end of the speculative evolution / world building rabbit hole, you get to a level where you can now imagine entire cosmologies or entire different concepts of spirits, time, space, life, and evolution in totality. This latest sphere of speculative evolution or world building is one of the rarest but also one of the most fun intellectual exercises out there. And now, in this episode of the CM Kosemen YouTube channel, I will introduce to you the Venerian satanic onion skin view of the desperate realm of the living, laying precariously over a chaotic, dark, and muddled realm. Yes, everyone, welcome to this channel. If you're a new viewer, this is where we speak about a lot of eccentric things. If you're a returning viewer, just know that Daddy Kosemen will have to move in a bit, moving houses and shit. So your Patreon donations, your Buy Me a Coffee donations, or your happy purchases from the merch store are more than welcome and actually a little desperately needed. So please everyone, money where your ears are, and try to contribute a little. If you go to my Patreon and subscribe there, you will actually get to see a lot of stuff that nobody else gets to see. Just this week I posted great new surreal paintings and actually a couple of creatures from the upcoming Snaiad remake. So, you know, it's not an empty donation in that respect. And if you can't donate any money, at least in the comment section, go there and comment, "Show me the deepest hell, Kosemen Daddy," so at least we get some algorithmic titration and some sort of activity going on below there. It helps push the video forward to the eyes of more people who, at least in theory, I hope will donate. So that's that. Anyways, this incredible and very dark view of the world comes from a book called Voyage to Venus, also known as Perelandra, by none other than C.S. Lewis, the famous author of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe and the rest of the Narnia series. He also wrote a bunch of other sci-fi books, a bunch of other fantasy books, and a great many essays and other non-fiction writings and stuff like that. This guy is a Christian apologist. He's a religious guy who ultimately believes in the goodness of God and especially the Christian God. And in this day and age, it has become fashionable to dunk on C.S. Lewis because sometimes his views seem a bit curmudgeonly. But actually, whether you're religious or not, whether you believe in C.S. Lewis' particular brand of belief or not, this guy is a real savant. He's a master of writing, and whenever you read his stuff, you come out with more ideas than you had when you first went in. And with that being said, I really recommend this book, Voyage to Venus. It's actually the sequel to a previous book called Out of the Silent Planet, where our hero, Dr. Ransom, goes to Mars, which is known in that universe as Malacandra. I haven't read that book, but he has some adventures there and meets the spirit of that world, which is akin to some sort of a world spirit / angel in Christian cosmology, and then does some good deeds, and I guess there's a lot of philosophical insights, and then he comes back to Earth. Now, this book we're going to talk about, Voyage to Venus, also known as Perelandra, is a different ball game altogether. Instead of the more adventurous and Barsoom-like flow of the previous Mars book, this book will be disappointing if you read it expecting to get into some sort of sci-fi swashbuckling swamp planet adventure. Instead, this book reads like a very complex religious/scientific allegory and almost like a theological text, in fact. Our hero, Dr. Ransom, goes to Mars and he faces a world of pristine and primordial beauty. There is no solid land in this world. Everything exists on floating mats of jungles and forests, laying atop a lush and life-filled ocean. And there are many animals and weird plants which are beautiful. The sensations on this planet are unlike any that are to be found on Earth. The lead character goes there and eats one fucking berry, okay? Just one berry. And he describes the experience as follows. It was so different from every other taste that it seemed mere pedantry to call it a taste at all. It was like the discovery of a totally new genus of pleasures, something unheard among men, out of all reckoning, beyond all covenant. It could not be classified. For one drop of this taste, entire wars would be fought on earth and empires would fall. It's that sort of a pleasure. Also, later on, he eats another sort of fruit, which is also described like this. They would have required an oratorio or a mystical meditation to fully convey. Sounds very mystical and almost paradisical, doesn't it? Well, as Ransom explores Venus, he meets people too. He comes across this really beautiful and almost seductive looking but also innocent naked girl who calls herself the queen of that world. Her skin is colored green, but other than that, she looks like an extremely beautiful and almost angelic sort of a human being. And this queen says this world is inhabited only by me and the king. Almost sounds like Adam and Eve, doesn't it? Oh, also on this world there's a dragon, which is like a kind of dopey, sidekick, dog-like character. You almost expect that to turn into the serpent, but it doesn't, and it's just a interesting and cute, funny side character. But yeah, as you read, you start noticing things, and obviously this Venus is just a stand-in for the Garden of Paradise before the fall of man. The woman who inhabits this world is extremely naive and innocent. In fact, when our hero Ransom starts telling her about life on other planets and stuff, she tells him, "Oh, Piebald," that's her nickname for him. "Oh, Piebald, you're making me old." In her parlance, learning stuff makes one old. And obviously also these people are immortal and they are the only two people living on this world. Now, as I just described earlier, this world is full of floating continents of vegetable mats and there's almost no solid ground except for one place, which the god of that world has forbidden the king and queen to walk on. There's this one place with solid land on it and we'll get there. We'll get there. But let's just tally up the details now. Oh God. Yeah, everybody. Aside from getting ready to move, Daddy Kosemen is also fighting a bit of something like COVID with green film. I'm just coughing up green film for the past 2 days. It's bad, man. So fucked up. And yeah, my film is as green as the skin of that Venus queen I just described you. So before we go on any further, I am imploring you once again to support me on my Patreon, my Buy Me a Coffee, or go to the merch store. I am really sick. The coughing is slightly exaggerated, but the emergency is real. Your contributions are really welcome. And let's go back to Venus. Now, it should strike you that all the key elements of the Genesis chapter of the Christian Bible are here. There's a paradisical world, there's a created king and queen, there's a world of innocence, and There's a commandment which must not be broken. Now, it's obvious that this is an allegory of the Garden of Eden. And into this garden comes Satan in form of an evil Professor Weston. It's a great name, I think. Everybody says the West is great, but here Weston is the name of an arrogant guy who turns out to be possessed by none other than hell itself. It's almost like Event Horizon kind of shit. So this Professor Weston was a more innocent, like Dr. Robotnik type evil professor on the earlier book on Mars. He wanted to make life multi-planetary. Does that ring a bell, anybody? He wanted to take human beings from Earth to Mars, and he tried to enslave the innocent Martian inhabitants. But he was just an evil, expansionist, manifest destiny kind of guy. He was evil, but he wasn't satanic or demonic. Now, in the second book, Professor Weston comes in flying with his doohickey spaceship, but he's not human anymore. Somewhere out in the interstellar void, he was actually possessed by a devil or Satan himself or a bunch of devils. The book isn't clear about that. And as soon as he lands, he tries to do all sorts of satanic stuff. There are some really dark paragraphs in the book where the satanic Dr. Weston shows just how bad and mean he is by actually torturing animals. Like, he cuts frogs open, and remember, this world is the pure innocent Garden of Eden, so actually no animal dies here for some reason. And this satanic guy just is shown killing frogs and other small animals casually just for the heck of it, and it's really dark and disturbing. So disturbing that I won't even grace you with a reread, but it really made me feel upset. I mean, I read books about nuclear war and stuff, but just these few paragraphs of this allegorical Satan guy torturing space frogs on Venus, it tied my stomach in knots, and I wanted this guy dead. Anyways, long story short, I won't describe all of the book, but we are going to get to the Venerian satanic onion skin cosmology of the universe I first told you about. It's a really dark and actually really interesting view of looking at the cosmos. So long story short, Dr. Weston, also known as Satan, and our hero, Dr. Ransom, engage in a kind of protracted college debate team kind of series of arguments where they try to convince this green, sexy Venus queen of their own ways. Dr. Weston says, you must break the commandment and live with the king on dry land. Oh, and he sounds like a kind of southern Louisiana or New Orleans Lothario figure, like, oh girl, I'm gonna teach you so much, you'll be far older when I'm through with you, and stuff like that. And, well, our good guy hero, Ransom, says, just think about this, don't do anything you don't want to do, like, what good will this be? So they have these arguments, and each tries to convince the Queen of Venus to sin or to keep chaste. And there are some funny moments, actually. Satan comes up with something like feminism to woo the Venerian goddess out of her way. And when that fails, he, again in a very disturbing sequence of paragraphs, kills some birds, steals their feathers, and makes some fanciful bird feather coats for himself and the Queen of Venus to wear. So when feminism fails, he tries to turn her into a fashionista instead. That chapter is actually really funny. Ransom wakes up and can't find the queen and the devil anywhere. So he looks around the forest and he comes into a clearing where he sees them like literally playing dress up. And the girl is like, oh, don't you think we're beautiful this way? Why didn't you tell me about this before? And then actually Weston says, well, you're far more beautiful naked than when you are wearing these stupid cheap clothes and something. Anyways, he wins that argument too. And in another memorable but hilarious sequence of events, Satan taunts Dr. Weston when everybody on the world sleeps. So since this is a paradise kind of world, it's very strictly ordered. When night falls, every creature on the world automatically falls asleep. including the Princess of Venus. And only Dr. Weston and Dr. Ransom are left awake. And I guess it is hinted that being awake at night is a sinful and dark thing, which only came about in the world after the fall of man. But yeah, that's what happens. And when everybody is asleep, only the satanic Dr. Weston is left staying awake. Now our hero is only a mortal man, so even he has to fall asleep sometimes. But when he's trying to fall asleep, Satan does this really ridiculous and funny thing. Until the break of dawn, he just says, ransom. 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 Yeah. Ransom. And he just keeps repeating his name over and over again, taunting him diabolically. And when I read this, I literally had a laughing fit myself. Because years and years ago, okay? Years and years ago, when I was like 10 and when my little brother was 5, I used to do the exact same thing to his ass when he was trying to fall asleep, and I was an older kid so I could stay up longer. So my brother's name was Khan, and when he's trying to fall asleep, I was like, Khan, Khan, Khan. You get the idea. Now it's just a funny coincidence, but was I possessed? I could never tell. Anyways, all these things happen, and so it turns into an allegorical battle of wits between the forces of good and the forces of evil. And at one point, Dr. Ransom becomes convinced that he needs to destroy Satan physically, and they have a big fight. It's very gruesomely written, and finally, Ransom succeeds in killing the satanically possessed Dr. Weston. But just as he's about to die, this demonic presence animates Weston's corpse once again. It's almost like Terminator coming back online with reserve power. And this time, he puts on a completely different act. He pretends that the possession is gone, and he's just the poor, innocent, meek, broken Weston in human form. And he says, I'm so sorry, I was wrong, you were right, I'm dying, oh no. And then he becomes this pitiful and misleading, treacherous figure. And there he gives Dr. Ransom his view of the demonic cosmos, which is really, really scary. And I am going to read to you straight from the book now. Children are afraid to go through a churchyard at night, and grown-ups tell them not to be silly. But the children know better than the grown-ups. People in Africa do horrible things with masks on in the middle of the night, and missionaries say it's all superstition. Well, the Africans know more about the darkness of the universe than white people. Dirty priests in back streets in Dublin, frightening half-witted children to death with stories about the afterlife. You say they're unenlightened. They're not, except that they think there's a way of escape. There is not. That is the real universe. Always has been, always will be. That's what it all means. I'm not quite clear, says Ransom. And then Weston says, that's why it's so important to live as long as you can. All the good things are now. That thin little skin, what we call life, put on for show, and then the real universe begins. Forever and ever. So his concept of life and the afterlife is like a very thin skin of life laying over an eternal depth of the afterlife. To thicken this skin by 1 millimeter, to live one more week, one more day, one half an hour longer. That's the only thing that matters. Of course, you don't know it, but every man who is waiting to be hanged knows it. You say, what difference does a short reprieve make? What a difference! Some people say that in death there is respite, but it's only a small parcel of civilized people who think that. Humanity as a whole knows better. People know, Homer knew, that all the dead have sunk down into the inner darkness under the skin of life. All the witless, all the twittering, gibbering, decaying, boogeyman. Every savage knows that all ghosts hate the living, who are still enjoying their skin of the life, just as old women hate girls who still have their good bodies. It is quite right to be afraid of ghosts. You are going to be one all the same. And then Ransom says, you only say that because you don't believe in God. And then the devil responds, saying, perhaps your God does exist, but it makes no difference whether he does or not. No, of course you wouldn't see it, but one day you will. I don't think you got the idea of the skin, the thin outer skin which we call life, really clear. Just think about it. Picture the universe as an infinite glove with this very thin crust on the outside. But remember, its thickness is a thickness of time. It is about 70 years thick in the best places. We are born on the surface of it, and all our lives we are sinking through it. When we've got all the way through, then we are what's called dead. We've got into the dark part inside, the real globe. If your God exists, he is not in the globe. He is outside, like a moon. And we pass into the interior, we pass out of his light. He does not follow us in. You would express it by saying he is not in time, which you think comforting. In other words, he stays put, out in the light and air, outside. But we sink into time. We move with the times. And that's basically his outline of a very, very dark view of the universe. Suffice it to say that you are like a transport protein on the membrane of a cell, and you're slowly sinking into the cell, except the cell is an infinity deep, and when you sink into it, all coherence loses meaning. When you have nightmares, you see different things melting into each other. You see a scary face, it turns into a scary bird, and then maybe it becomes a scary person, whatever, I don't know. Like you see a scary explosion or some shit. It doesn't matter. According to this view, all those nightmares are real, actually. They do not have a meaning. Their lack of meaning is the concept of that world. And inevitably, when we die, our consciousness will decay and become part of that H.R. Giger-like mass of tormented, moldering entities turning into one another without rest or meaning. And it's just very dark. And it's a very original conceptualization of what one might call a high-order speculative evolution world building. And certainly it's food for thought. I don't know about life and death, everybody. I mean, I do have certain inklings and they're very positive. I think we are all emanations of some sort of consciousness which unites every living thing together. So when you die, you'll go to the same place as a fly would go when it dies, but it will inevitably be a nice kind of plane of existence. I don't know. I have no evidence to prove this, only some very strong intuitions and some mystical personal experiences. So my view of the afterlife is not as dark, but it is to the credit of C.S. Lewis' greatness as an author that he can articulate ideas in such a way. Whether you agree with his Christian worldview or not, he's certainly a great writer. He's certainly really good at packaging ideas and presenting them, and I think everyone can learn something from his writings, whether you believe in it or not. Well, that's that, everyone. That's Daddy Kosemen's exposition of the chaotic, eternal, H.R. Gigeresque view of the afterlife as put forward by the antagonist of C.S. Lewis, Voyage to Venus. I really recommend this book. I really recommend reading everything written by C.S. Lewis, actually. But most importantly, what do you think? Do you have any personal intuitions about the afterlife or the life beyond life? as you might, please share them in the comments. And once again, please consider supporting me. Look, man, I'm just like taking time off from my original day job, making these videos for you to enjoy. So any contribution is really welcomed. And most importantly, I hope you had fun and I hope you learned something new with this podcast. And that being said, have a nice day and I love you all. Goodbye for now.